Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Wow. Okay. Well, that's how I'm doing. All right, boy, everything has fallen apart right at the last second there as I'm getting ready and turn on the microphone and then just like inhale and like, oh, I'm going to choke. Okay, not certain what's going on here. At any rate, maybe I'm just startled at the amount of news today. We could go in any one of 50,000 different directions and fill all 2 hours with any piece of it. I don't know how we're going to manage it all today, but Greg is taking a stab at it. I have 52 messages waiting on Skype. Not each and every one of them a distinct story, but certainly a distinct angle on the various stories. Things accelerating in Ukraine and in Russia, reporting tweets that I'm seeing all over the place, unconfirmed stories, but just reporters who are either on the ground or speaking to people who are on the ground saying that these things are happening. People are rushing for the borders everywhere. People in Ukraine rushing for the borders to get out of the way. People in Russia rushing for the border. Not for the border with Ukraine, but looking for exits from Russia before a feared closure of their borders and also a feared imposition of martial law inside of Russia, which, is that really a big change from the normal state of affairs in Russia, generally speaking? Well, certainly not for dissidents and people targeted by the government, but now everybody wants a way out. People with sons of draftable age or young families where the father is perhaps of still draftable age, looking to get out of the way of exactly that, being sort of, I guess, impressed into service in the war in Ukraine. More things happening, of course, people heading for the exits into Ukraine, worried about getting in the way of the fighting there. Some very interesting reports from those watching from afar on the condition of the Russian troops and equipment entering into the country. So still lots of questions about how this is going to go. And in addition to, more speculation about how things might go down, both from within and without Russia itself. And reports of more yachts, mega yachts being seized around the world. The French government have seized one or two. The Germans have seized a few. The United States hanging back on that, and probably wise to do so at this point. And NATO being as unified as it is, I don't know that they're going to make any distinction inside of Russia about who's seizing the yachts, but rather than give them the excuse, perhaps we hang back and let the people who are right there in Europe make the decision to move in that direction. Let's see, a million other things happening here. Pandemic still out there, although most Americans and in a lot of locations abroad too, making some local governments making conscious decisions to move away from the various restrictions. It won't matter very much to the people who love complaining about restrictions. They'll just make that up and continue to complain about that. And we saw, as a matter of fact, a good illustration of that yesterday down in Florida as Ron DeSantis showed up to an education event at which I guess he must have ordered up some prop students to stand behind him during his remarks. And the students were masked, and that infuriated DeSantis. And he, pointed and jabbed and shouted and cajoled, told them to take their masks off, and then I guess caught himself mid-sentence and said, you can wear it if you want to, but it's ridiculous for you to do so. It's COVID theater and yada, 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 et cetera, et cetera. About half the students actually took their masks off. The other half said, not interested in what you have to say, going to keep them on. But just goes to show you, never about anybody else's freedom or anything like that. Like, they always say, you're free to wear the mask if you want to, but people who don't want to, they should be allowed to take them off. Governor shows up and will point and jab a finger in your face and tell you to take it off. right to your face. We all knew that was coming. And here in Virginia, you should be aware that the nice Mr. Fleece Vest will probably start doing the same at any moment. There's more. Greg's got it. Let's get started. There's too much to... We can't wait anymore. Should I talk more about how we can't wait, or should I let you start, Greg? Good morning.
Well, why don't I start?
Okay.
I think the first thing, you're talking about seizing yachts.
Yes.
They're also seizing heads. There's a wax museum in Paris.
What?
That removed the statue of Putin. They have a video of the curator there pulling his head off.
Really?
And they're talking about maybe replacing it with a Zelensky statue because the statue stands right next to Biden.
Oh, okay.
So
well, that would be
a lot of things are coming apart, including Vladimir Putin's body, apparently.
Yeah. Well, he just took it off like the normal way that a wax museum would, I guess.
You pull it and it comes off. I mean, who knew?
As opposed to like a samurai sword or anything weird like that, right? Okay.
Right. Anyway, other things. I'm going to mention this really quickly because if I don't, I'm going to forget.
Yes.
But Dick Durbin sets hearings on Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Yes.
For March 21st, and Schumer says to expect a confirmation vote before Easter.
All right. Wouldn't that be nice? Easter. Be so beautiful. Okay.
Anyway, a couple of things here. This one is from Tim Mack, who's in Ukraine. He's an NPR reporter.
We'll call him.
Morning to those in the U.S. from Ukraine, where Kyiv remains in Ukrainian hands. 1 week ago at around 5 a.m., and like many Ukrainians, I received the rudest wake-up call of my life. Oh. He's pointing out the invasion is now a week old.
Okay.
And Happy Ukraine hasn't fallen, and neither has Kyiv.
Well, good. I mean, yeah, unexpected. Good luck.
Right. Our in-country team at NPR was scattered all across Ukraine. We rallied a few hours outside of Kyiv, focused on taking only rural roads for safety.
Oh, I see.
And spent the next few days driving to relative safely, a trip that pre-war would have only taken a few hours. We did morning edition as we evacuated the city, and then with no power, we met up with our colleagues, saw the panic when a gas station employee came in the PA and said there's an airstrike inbound.
Oh.
So, like some others, I'm feeling some sadness this week, and that's okay, just a healthy part of processing the experience. I think it's natural to reflect on what's happened and positive to feel what you need to feel. I don't mean to compare my feelings with those Ukrainians who, of course, are the ones who feel it the most. It's their dreams that were abruptly interrupted and in some cases permanently. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing all over Ukrainians talking about what a week it's been, but the Ukrainians who are most alarmed on day one are feeling a lot better after a week. Feeling better after a week. He didn't say a lot. I added that.
Oh, okay.
Given how their country is fighting well above initial expectations. Let's not forget the dreams of many Russians who in a flash saw their dreams extinguished as well by the war initiated by their government. My friend Julia Offey makes this eloquent point. Friend after friend fleeing Russia, 5 today alone, the best and brightest, the journalists who are telling people the truth about the country gone. Emigres like the white Russians of a century ago. Putin is destroying 2 countries at once. So when it comes to extinguished dreams, Tim Mack writes, some have been extinguished permanently. Some were civilians, many were soldiers. Russia announced 498 of its soldiers killed. U.S. estimates a couple of thousands. Ukraine says 9,000 killed on the Russian side. I spoke to a doctor in Chernobyl who's teaching civilians medicine. We started talking about her work and then the war. She said Russians were like neighbors, like brothers, and the week's events were a knife in the back, a sin from the Russian government.
Okay.
So they also showed me a Soviet-era tourniquet, which I'm pretty sure I can say you should only use as an absolute last resort. They're still being made, still being carried. And to me, Tim Mack, the reporter, it's a sign of how far behind Russian military gear is compared to the U.S., whereas the Ukrainian first aid kit is essentially just like the American military version. Tourniquets, chest seals, Israeli bandages, pressure dressings, and so on. But medical supplies like this and prescription drugs are dwindling. The doctor we spoke to about this kit warned that within a week, the stock of life-saving drugs would be diminished. So they're doing okay relative to expectations. They're not doing okay in terms of Russia turning up the let's see if we can bomb things and really get a lot of civilians killed. And there are unconfirmed reports of Russia now getting ready to fire on their own border so they can claim a provocation. So, we'll see what happens there. But separately, this is a fascinating thread in Russian, translated by Google, so forgive the English, by Maxim Mironov. And Maxim Mironov, he is a finance guy, doctor at University of Chicago, but he's currently, I think, at an institution in Spain. And he says, many people ask me to comment on the sanctions. He's writing in Russian.
Okay.
In short, my scientific conclusion as a professor of finance, doctorate from the University of Chicago, is Russia is effed.
Oh, that's technical.
And double effed that the inhabitants of Russia, even the educated for the most part, don't understand what awaits them. Let me explain.
Okay.
Very soon, the Russians will face a shortage of basic products. And I'm not talking about all kinds of iPhones, the import of which has already been banned, but about food, clothes, cars, household appliances. Russia is very strongly integrated into world trade, and already the largest operators refuse to sell containers to Russia. But even if a miracle happens and Russia finds somebody who's ready to send containers of stuff to Russia, the question is how to pay for it. Export earnings will decrease significantly. All buyers will try to abandon Russian goods. We see that even non-sanctioned oil companies can't find buyers for their oil. Gazprom, the main exporter of gas, is already under sanctions. It's generally unclear how it will see foreign exchange. The Russian central bank has accumulated a huge money box of $650 billion, but more than half of those reserves have already been arrested. And what to do with the gold reserves is not clear because few banks in the world will want to buy it from the Russian central bank. Yeah. So the age-old question, how much is your house worth?
Yeah, well, I guess.
Well, the answer is whatever somebody will pay for it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Right? You could think it's worth $1 billion, and some other guy will come around and say, well, I'll give you $5 million.
Yeah.
Not $5 billion. $5 million.
Trump, this is your chance to build that hotel, man.
Right? So many people think that Russia over the past year has built a bunch of factories, only all those factories, automobile, aviation, household appliances, they all use imported components, just like us. That is, in the coming months, we will face the shutdown of entire industries, he writes, with all the ensuing consequences, a shortage of goods, mass unemployment, a falling tax collection, and as a result, problems with the payment of salaries to state employees. Planes, even within Russia, will also soon stop flying. After all, almost all of them are imported, and the West has already banned supplying spare parts. Therefore, we'll see a massive decommissioning of aircraft. The Internet as we know it will be shut down. They've already blocked a bunch of information sites. One day they're going to block Wikipedia. Twitter and Facebook are slowing, going to shut down YouTube. And about agriculture, are you aware that in Russia the share of imported seeds is almost 40%, and for potatoes it's 90%? That is, farmers will come up with something over time, but in the short term, there's going to be a shortage of basic agricultural products and a sharp rise in prices. And that's not all. Everybody who can leave the country will start to leave. That's what Julian Offey was saying.
Yeah.
Already actively failed. The government understands this, which is why they introduced a bunch of measures today to keep IT people, only they won't work. I had years and years and years ago, when I first started practicing in Danbury, a couple of years I had a Russian, formerly from St. Petersburg, as a partner.
Yes.
And he had a whole bunch of Russian sayings he used to bring to work, which turned out to be really valuable. When we felt like whoever pays us wasn't paying us enough, he used to say, it was worse than the Soviet Union.
Yes, of course.
They pretended to pay us and we pretended to work. And, that's basically what's going on here. Only they won't work. Therefore, it's very likely that exit visas will soon be introduced for certain categories or completely close the country. The only plus from this story is that those who are nostalgic for the USSR will be able to feel all its delights in their own skin.
Right.
And it won't be a relatively mild USSR like Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Gorbachev, but a USSR headed by a crazy dictator. P.S.
Have they ever had
Here's a news story today in Russian illustrating the scenario described in the thread. Avtovaz has already stopped making cars. And it seems that it should not depend on imports at all, but they'll suspend the assembly of cars due to a shortage of electronic components. Work to stop for 4 days already, according to TASS.
Okay. That's it for my Avtovaz. So much for that. I'm not getting another one, I don't think. I guess that's what they drive.
Right. So, it's good to keep this in perspective. Here is a Business Week take. The end of the oligarch era nears with Putin's miscalculation in Ukraine. Sanctions are punishing Russia's wealthiest business people, you mentioned the yachts, and the country's leader by bringing a cold, hard stop to 30 years of integration with the global economy.
Well,
Okay.
it's your idea, not mine. Yes.
On the day Russia's invasion began, Zelensky asked in a video address, I think in Russian, to the Russian people, "What do we hear today? It's not just rocket explosions, fighting, and the roar of aircraft. This is the sound of a new iron curtain lowering and closing Russia off from the civilized world." It's the defining quote of our abrupt new world order. Many Kremlin watchers never thought Putin would go this far. Never thought a man known for winning calculated bets would invade and attempt to hold a country of more than 44 million people. To put that in perspective, I'm trying to remember who wrote this, but essentially, you're trying to occupy Texas, a country the size of Texas.
Oh,
The population of Brownsville, Texas, 183,000 people.
okay. Well,
That's
I don't
hard.
know. Something Jade Helm. We practiced it.
Yeah, but you think, fine,
It's
you can
difficult.
disperse, or you can take one city at a time and then move on to another, or maybe even take two. How do you hold it?
Yeah, I don't know. It just occurred to me though as you're saying it. I'm wondering whether maybe we talk a lot about Russia not really being a government and a country.
No, it's a giant gas
sense,
station
right?
with the economy
Yes.
of the size of New Jersey.
And I wonder whether the old model,
Run by the
whether
Sopranos.
whether you hold territory or whether you're just we're just here as leg breakers.
Yeah. I witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, says the author of this article. I was in Prague, where I'd moved as a bright-eyed recent college grad. The mood then was giddy with the belief that once oppressed societies were now free, with all the hope and promise of what political reforms could deliver. At the time, Ukraine had the world's third largest nuclear stockpile, making its declaration of independence a geopolitical security issue from day one. In 1994, Ukraine gave up its nukes in exchange for assurances from the U.S., UK, and Russia that its territorial integrity would be preserved to guarantee Russia violated. And the debate about whether Ukraine should join the NATO or the European Union has formed a central fault line in its politics and led to two revolutions since 2004. Putin exploited these, annexing Crimea in 2014 and backing Russian separatists in the east. His moves left Ukraine united in its yearning to be part of Europe, but the Western response to Putin's land grabs was feeble. And the actions of Manafort and Giuliani in Ukraine, as I reported on from 2017 to 2019, did immeasurable harm. Remember that, because we're going to come back to that theme. David Rotkoff is
Turns out
writing
we're
today
involved.
what's going on with the January 6th committee declaring that there's pretty good evidence of a crime on January 6th. And this stuff that we're talking about Ukraine is the same story.
What? They
You
should
have to keep
impeach
that in mind.
guy.
It's all the same story. And the actions of Manafort and Giuliani in Ukraine did immeasurable harm. Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager, earned millions of dollars over a decade advising pro-Russian political parties. And in 2019, Trump dispatched Giuliani as lawyer to pressure Zelensky's advisors into investigating the Bidens. And this put the country in an impossible situation where it needed U.S. support to ward off the threat from its neighbors. Bill Browder, who was once the largest foreign portfolio investor in Russia, has warned about Putin for years. In 2009, his Russian lawyer, Majinsky, died after being deprived of medical care in a Moscow prison. He'd uncovered tax fraud linked to Russian officials. The best way to punish Putin is to target the Russian oligarchs, which I think is known. We all know that. Tougher sanctions could have been put in place long ago, but weren't, because tainted Russian money is so entrenched in Western economies and penthouses in New York, townhouses in London.
Yes.
And the British reporters are starting to refer to London as Londongrad. And seaside mansions in the south of France. Sanctioning oligarchs who made their fortunes with the Kremlin's blessing has rattled Putin. He branded the Western Empire lies. We found his Achilles heel, Browder says. We sanction the oligarchs. He threatens nuclear war.
Okay.
That's bad. So the UK says they're drawing up a hit list of additional oligarchs to sanction, but she's told members of parliament that lawyers working for Russian billionaires have sent letters warning that they challenge the measures. Londongrad, the nickname given to the British capital for being a Russian wealth magnet, may soldier on without wider UK sanctions. There's other stuff that he didn't write here. That there's all sorts of rumors about the Tory party being paid for by the Russians, similar to our own GOP, and they are in power. So that's part of the reason why the sanctions may be less than you think, because if you reveal all, you may find out that Russia paid for Brexit.
Yeah, you might find
That's why
that
I
out.
say it's all one story here.
Yes.
Currently, the UK hasn't gone as far as the EU, and remember, the UK has broken from EU, which penalized a handful of the wealthiest oligarchs with assets outside Russia. They include metals tycoon Alisher Usmanov, banking billionaires Mikhail Friedman and Peter Avin, and steel magnate Alexei Mordashov. Friedman and Avin called on Russia to end the war immediately. Oleg Deripaska, the founder of aluminum giant United Company, Rusal International, who's been under U.S. sanctions since 2018, called for peace talks. Roman Abramovich said he's selling the Chelsea Football Club, which he's owned for almost 20 years. It's going to go for $4 billion.
Wow.
And he'll set up a charitable foundation with the net proceeds from the sale to benefit victims of the war.
He's really looking to save his neck. Okay.
I think he wants to stay out of Russia, stay west.
Yeah.
The West strategy will be to further isolate Russia through widening penalties. Monaco, long a haven for Russian money, announced it's freezing Russian assets. Switzerland abandoned its historic neutrality to do the same. If you lose Switzerland and Monaco, you're in trouble.
Yes.
Europe has shut down its airspace to Russian planes.
Okay.
And SWIFT, of course, we talked about that. The messaging system is excluding 7 Russian banks. BP, Exxon, Shell, and other Western energy companies are quitting decades-long investments in Russia. They're writing it off. Car and truck manufacturers are cutting ties. The list of companies leaving Russia is getting longer by the day, a reversal of 30 years of investment. And they banned transactions with Russia's central bank. Therefore, you can't use the money, the gold they have. The fear is that Putin, having backed himself into a corner, might resort to more drastic military action. Putin doesn't do humiliation well, Browder says. His response is scorched earth carpet bombing with massive civilian casualties as a way of showing everybody he's not a guy to mess with.
Oh.
So that's why people are worried. There's no question Russia's losing and ultimately will lose. The question is, what damage is he going to do on the way?
Okay.
So with that in mind, Dave Rothkopf says, the two big stories tonight about Russia's attack on Ukraine and Trump's attack on democracy, and we'll get to that after the break,
all right,
are the same story, part of an extended global effort by Russia to attack democracies worldwide. Their techniques differ. There's no equating the suffering Ukraine is going through with what we've experienced, but denying the connection, not acknowledging the bigger picture, will make it that much harder to defeat Putin's efforts. Paul Manafort but I need for you to do me a favor, though. They really need to be mentioned every single day when we talk about Ukraine. It's all part of that story.
Okay.
So, to get us to the break, we got like 4 minutes left.
Yeah.
Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney have a statement on a filing on a lawsuit that the January 6th committee announced last night in regard to John Eastman.
Aha.
Okay.
Son of a... No, yes, that guy, right?
The Select Committee's brief refutes on numerous grounds the privilege claims Dr. Eastman has made to try to keep hidden records critical to our investigation. The Select Committee is not conducting a criminal investigation, but as the judge noted at a previous hearing, Dr. Eastman's privilege claims raise the question whether the crime-fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege applies. We believe evidence in our possession justifies review of these documents under this exception in camera.
Yes.
There's a picture of it?
In chambers, basically.
The facts we've gathered strongly suggest that Dr. Eastman's emails may show he helped Donald Trump advance a corrupt scheme to obstruct the counting of electoral college ballots and a conspiracy to impede the transfer of power. We look forward to the court's review of our filing as the Select Committee's investigation moves forward. And Kyle Cheney sums this up.
All right. Okay. Let's hear it.
The January 6th Select Committee says it believes Donald Trump violated multiple laws in his quest to overturn the 2020 election, including obstruction of Congress and defrauding the United States. In a major release of findings filed in federal court tonight, the panel revealed broad swaths of its conclusion, and then he gives a detailed analysis. We'll talk about that after the break. But here's the part I want to focus on for right now.
Yes, good.
They supported its conclusions by releasing excerpts from multiple depositions, including the following 7 people, and I'm going to try to identify them and correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Jason Miller, all-around jerk and advisor to Donald Trump.
Believe so.
Mark Short, who was Mike Pence's chief of staff. You'll see the Pence connection here.
Yeah, a little bit of a jerk, too.
Greg Jacob, who was Mike Pence's counselor, chief counselor. John Eastman himself was trying to withhold information. Keith Kellogg, a general, retired, who was Mike Pence's military advisor and advisor on foreign affairs.
Okay.
Jeff Rosen and Richard Donahue, lawyers at the Justice Department. Rosen, a bad guy, Donahue, a good guy.
Okay. Maybe.
As far as I think. Well, I think Donahue was trying to resist some of the stuff that was going on, and Rosen was trying to take over.
Right. Like Putin.
Again, it's all getting really complicated. I'm not Marcy Wheeler. I don't have an eidetic memory, and I can't remember who everybody is without looking it up, but that's my recollection. But the point is, there's a lot of Pence people in there, and they've gotten a lot of information from Pence people about what actually happened.
Yeah, we were waiting for hearing from people who were upset about the prospect of hanging Mike Pence to talk.
The committee revealed the details of an exchange that came after the riot had subsided, in which Eastman makes one last-ditch bid to convince Pence to violate the Electoral Count Act, an indication that Eastman knew it was against the law. And all of this is part of an effort to convince a federal judge to reject Eastman's effort to shield his records by claiming attorney-client privilege. Remember that, because this is not the Justice Department being asked to look after Trump for criminal involvement. What they're saying is there's enough evidence of Trump's criminal involvement that we think attorney-client privilege doesn't apply here. That's what this is about.
Right. Well, it is. It's very interesting, and it'll be interesting to see what a judge does with that, and whether the judge says, well, I'll apply the crime fraud exception, now based on this evidence, or whether he says, bring me a conviction and I'll do it. We'll see which direction they go. I'm not certain how, it's an unusual thing. I mean, it's a real concept that they use and apply all the time, but it's rare that you get this far into an investigation on something this big, certainly, and just have to throw out attorney-client privilege at all. That's usually unusual, and you usually don't find that criminal activity like this. Wow.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Well, welcome back.
Senator Loeffler, call your office.
If it's your turn, you might as well call us, Senator Loeffler, or former Senator Loeffler, thankfully, and we'll talk about this. Hey, Greg has sent me a memo of some kind. Where did that come from? This is
from Kyle Cheney's tweet list thread that I was reading to you about the fact that the January 6th committee is after John Eastman's correspondence thinking attorney-client privilege doesn't shield you from a crime.
Yes, that's a real precept. As I was trying to sort of spit out before the break, it's tested, it's real, and it happens from time to time. It's just, generally speaking, pretty unusual because attorneys
because you're a lawyer. See, I'm not a lawyer, and the first thing I think of, well, it happens all the time. Michael Cohen, Rudy Giuliani. I mean, we all know the drill now. The judge appoints a special master and goes through all the stuff that shows that they're a crook. Come on. I watch The Sopranos. I know what's going on here.
And that's exactly what it is. You really don't run into this outside of the context very often, anyway, of RICO prosecutions for mobsters, because those are the only lawyers that are typically willing to do something dumb enough to get themselves in real danger of having violated the crime fraud exception, which is just what it sounds like. You have attorney-client privilege is presumed at all times, unless you can make a clear showing that, well, the privilege is being used to shield evidence of a crime, and the attorney knows it. And that's what it sounds like they're making the claim for with respect to Eastman, which is amazing because he's not even like a courtroom practicing day-to-day attorney. He's like, the foundation guy from Claremont. You're bringing in as an academic expert.
Constitutional lawyer, brought in as an academic, and then claiming attorney-client privilege. Who is he representing?
I don't know. Yeah,
I just work here. I just asked.
That's a good question because in order to make a crime, a pleading on a crime fraud exception, and ask for that, at some point you're gonna have to say who the guy's working for, and there's only one person who could possibly be considered a client at that stage, and it's
my name is Tom Hagen, and I have only one client.
Yeah, and I guess
and
that's
it's a family
all
business.
There could be. Wow. Well, man. There's a lot of craziness.
So I thought that was a pretty big story.
Yeah, and we were looking at this document here. Looks like to be the is it the president's schedule?
It's president's schedule. He's got handwritten notes on it, and he lists all the people that he's going to talk to that day before the riot, before the insurrection, and includes Kelly Loeffler.
Yeah, and it appears to include an 11:20 a.m. meeting with. Or a call, maybe? Is that what the C is?
I think it's a call.
With Pence. Like, okay. So one last try. So by 11:20, he's still calling the guy saying, "You got to, I need you to do some crimes for me."
So again, I'd like you to do me a favor. This is the January 6th Committee official Twitter account, and summarizing all of the above. The facts we've gathered strongly suggest that Dr. Eastman's emails may show that he helped Donald Trump advance a corrupt scheme to obstruct the counting of electoral college ballots and a conspiracy to impede the transfer of power. Right? And so a lot of the stuff that's in there refers to the very same stuff that the January 6th trials and convictions and as of last night, at least one person pleading guilty to seditious conspiracy.
Yeah, that puts sedition on the table. I mean, not
on
the table.
The Justice Department has made the case with the January 6th actual perps who they arrested that if you try to obstruct an official act or meeting in camera, I guess, of the Congress trying to do something official, that's obstruction. And the perps have argued, no, it's not because it's ceremonial. It's not really an official thing. And judge after judge has ruled, no, it is. And you're guilty. And so now,
it's interesting
when the January 6th committee goes and says, not only they did it, Trump did it, and it's a crime, and these people have not only been convicted for it, this guy pleaded guilty for doing the same thing. It's a real charge.
Yeah, it is an interesting argument to make, too. It's not really a crime to disrupt it because it's just ceremonial. Well, then there's no real way to reverse the results of the election during it either, if that's your opinion of what's going on here. So why are you trying so hard? If the results are the results and the ceremony doesn't matter,
because
then get lost.
Intimidation, and we go back to the States and we do it there.
I guess.
And then at a later point, we have a real meeting of the House where each individual state delegation decides what's going on. And that's our plan.
That was their hope, but that's because they thought that there were real...
Are you saying hope is not a plan? In this case, hope was a plan.
Well, yeah, okay. That was their only plan anyway. It's not a good plan. It's not a good plan, but it was a plan. Saying should go. Hope is a plan.
That's where Eastman comes into it, and that's why they want to know what Eastman was telling Trump and Trump was telling Eastman.
Yeah. So, this is it's fairly astonishing and lots of moving parts to it. But yeah, like as you said, they're all connected. It's amazing that it all happens at the same time as them getting a guilty plea to sedition charges on top of it all. Which reminds me also that I think there was a clip circulating on Twitter yesterday of the Russian ambassador to the UN giving his spiel, trying to explain things. And the clip that was circulating was just for a couple of seconds of him saying and having translated that, describing the United States as a country that has just had its own legitimate president overthrown. So
Yeah, pretty much.
just like,
It's the same story.
Okay,
Even
yeah.
they say so.
Yeah, well, they're the only other ones that say it. Only Trump and the Russians believe that, and that's odd.
Yeah, not odd.
They're half a world apart, and yet
They're the
weird.
same story. Dan Friedman writes, in the plea hearing for Oath Keeper Joshua James, Judge Mehta says that James has agreed to plead guilty to seditious conspiracy, making him the first person to do so. Real crime, real results. Now take those same tools, turn them on Donald Trump. That's what's happening here. You're right. It's a RICO thing. You start at the bottom, and you work your way up from the lowest soldier to the highest general to the commander-in-chief.
Okay.
That's what's happening here.
Well, I guess they'll have to. You do wonder. I'm not certain what motivated him to do this.
Oh, by the way,
Very
as part of
curious.
his plea, James has agreed to fully cooperate with the Department of Justice, including testifying before a grand jury and at trial.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of years attached to a sedition conviction.
Well, maybe he
20.
doesn't want to get hung.
Yeah, well, I'm not certain that that one's on the table or not. Just for mere sedition. But it's a good 20 years plus, end of your life for the most part. So I guess he's got some kind of special deal coming, but only if he gives everybody up. And that's what they were looking for.
So Dan Friedman, who is a Mother Jones reporter, says it's not a surprise that Feds got someone to plead guilty to sedition, but it's obviously an important sign that Feds are going to get some convictions, making the point that January 6th wasn't just a rally with some trespassing, but treason, pretty much.
There you go. That's the one we're hanging people for. Yay!
Right?
We
Hardly a month
made
ago, it looked like there were good odds no one would face sedition charges. Now Feds have gotten one sedition plea with more likely to follow. So there's a write-up in Mother Jones about that. So this is a big deal, and it's all part of the same thing. And it's not conspiracy theory to think that, oh, these guys may actually do this or that or everything. Why isn't Department of Justice? Guys, chill. Look what's going on here.
Well, they got a good one there, and that was clearly their aim. I did see Marcy even just sort of despondent yesterday for a moment about. I see how well they've done with the prosecution of the Oath Keepers, and it's resulted in this guilty plea. But she was upset, given the fact that they were able to do this methodically over at the DOJ, the fact that they seem to be still flubbing Proud Boy prosecutions was disturbing to her. But she didn't elaborate on that, so we'll have to keep an eye on that.
Right, and at the same time, if they start talking, it makes the prosecution efforts a lot stronger. It's a question of what they have and what they don't have, and whether or not they have, some of these communication channels that they were using. One of them published stuff like, "Oh my God, look what's going on! Delete everything right now!" Right? But some of the channels they used had auto deletes. Yeah. That doesn't mean that the feds have that stuff. And if you don't have that stuff, you can't make a strong case. So there's a lot going on here, depending upon who did what, who was stupid, who was using, Donald Trump uses a regular phone rather than a government-issued phone. Why is that important? This kind of stuff is why it's important.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what they're able to get a hold of, and whether any of this transfers over. Maybe it solidifies the cases on the Proud Boy side, or maybe they just, I don't know, it could be we just don't have the stuff that we wanted on them. They were better at deleting things, or maybe they were a bunch of clowns and the Oath Keepers really were kind of organized, and we're going to start with them.
Yeah, there's a number of things going on, so it's hard to know. And when it comes to, well, why don't you just arrest Donald Trump? Well, you really have to build a case. And the first thing they're doing is building the case for the thing that he's most liable for. I know you want to get Capone on murder, but if tax evasion is your strongest case, that's what you're going to do.
Yep. Well, all right. So they got one. That was big news. That changes the complexion of all remaining cases. Yes. Good news.
And sort of explains to the public what's going on here.
Yeah. It'll help clarify things for sure.
Now, there's 11 people charged with seditious conspiracy. I didn't remember that number off the top of my head, but it's in the Mother Jones article. He's the first to plead guilty and cooperate with investigators, and that's bad news for his co-defendants, including Oath Keeper founder Stuart Rhodes. Mm-hmm. Jones and another Oath Keeper raced to the Capitol in a golf cart, and they tussled with police officers and joined the riot in the Capitol. And a charging document alleges that Michael Simmons, whom Rhodes called the group's team leader, exchanged 8 calls with James between 1:59 p.m. and 2:33 p.m. on January 6th. And he also pleaded guilty to obstruction of an official proceeding. That makes it an official proceeding, not a ceremonial one.
Yes, well, that was...
Who says? Well,
really
the law says.
Yeah, that guy's ticket to jail says it. So,
yeah.
Okay. Well, good. It was, that one was easier to establish. The obstruction thing came some time ago, but now we have some big time, convictions. I guess, or I guess we haven't gotten to that stage yet. But a plea.
Right. Another thing from Kyle Cheney's that I want to talk about is another piece that he had here in his tweet thread. Read Pence counsel Greg Jacobs' full response to John Eastman during the attack on the Capitol, and things got heated. The one they released says, from Greg Jacob to John Eastman, I do apologize for that particular language, which was unbecoming of me and reflective of a man whose wife and 3 young children are currently glued to news reports as I am moved about to locations where we'll be safe. Mostly peaceful, as CNN might say, who believe with all their hearts the theory they were sold about the powers that could legitimately be exercised at the Capitol this day. Please forgive me for that. But the advice provided, he's writing to John Eastman, has, whether intended or not, functioned as a serpent in the ear of the President of the United States, the most powerful office in the entire world. For the record, we were in the middle of an open, widely televised debate that was airing every single point you gave members of Congress to make when all of this went down and we had to suspend. I am not for a moment suggesting you intended it, but we were in fact giving you precisely the transparent debate you suggested we were not. It is then up to you and the legal team to arm members with a case at least sufficient to convince the Senate. I'm not hearing that case at the moment, which I was anticipating with great interest, having previously reviewed many of the underlying filed materials because the Senate had been abandoned. Respectfully, it was gravely, gravely irresponsible for you to entice the president with an academic theory that had no legal viability and you well know would lose before any judge who heard and decided the case. And if the courts decline to hear it, I suppose it can only be decided in the streets. The knowing amplification of that theory through numerous surrogates, whipping large numbers of people into a frenzy over something with no chance of ever attaining legal force, has led us to where we are. I don't begrudge academics debating far-flung theories. I love doing it myself, and I view the ferment of ideas as a good and helpful thing. But advising the President of the United States in a constitutionally fraught moment requires seriousness of purpose and understanding of the difference between abstract theory and legal reality, and an appreciation of the power of both the office and the bully puppet that, in my judgment, was entirely absent. I'll say no more, and perhaps at some future Federalist society we can more fully engage in the academic debate. God bless.
Yeah, that's not going to happen because...
Which is, as far as I can tell, code for, you asshole, you just tried to get me killed.
Yeah, well, among other things, it also would make an excellent speech by the judge at Eastman's sentencing. It would cover all the same points. Yeah, all
and this
the
is stuff the January 6th committee has and is releasing. And they got a lot of stuff they haven't released yet. I'm just saying.
That's great.
I think it's going to be, I told you this for months, I think this is going to be really compelling viewing. And they're getting very close.
Good. It's about time. And, all the time that we kept saying, but it's not even going to start until April. It's March.
That's in like a couple of weeks.
Yeah. So I guess we're finally going to get that.
So they have a couple of weeks to decide whether or not to entice, subpoena, shame, impossible with Republicans, or otherwise cajole Jim Jordan and the other members who were seditionists to try to testify. And I think that's one of the reasons why Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene are losing it.
I guess that, they never had it. But
names are going to be named.
Yeah, good. Finally, it's about time. I can't wait.
We invited them here to give their side of it. They refused, so we're telling you what happened as far as we can tell, and here are the receipts.
It's really remarkable, and that was, it was a great speech there from, who were we listening to? Greg Jacob.
Greg Jacob, who is Mike Pence's chief of counsel.
It's really well put, and by the way, to write that in the middle of the riot is pretty
I want to
good,
know
too.
what he apologized for.
He was kidding, I think, but I mean, in terms of, I don't really apologize.
I'm sorry I said that to you.
Yeah, not really. But
what did you say?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I want to know
I would
what
like
you
to
called
know.
that son of a bitch. That's what I want to know.
Right. Yeah. Or you'll hang for this. Oh, I'm sorry I said that. I don't know. Well, that's a good question. Sidebar, but an interesting one.
Why are you counseling the president to commit treason? I mean, I want to know what he said.
That's well, yeah, I don't know. He might have said something personal about that, but that's surely the motivating
You're
factor.
an asshole for advising the
Please
president
stop
to
that.
commit treason. But those are both important statements.
Yes, and I'd love to get them on the record and bleep them. But still, it's I would like to know what
This
he
is
said.
my weekly attempt to get David thrown off of YouTube.
I don't think that will happen. I think you can do that all you want on YouTube.
Yeah, I try to pick my words carefully. I only use the F word when it's actually in the headline.
Yeah, although you did a nice job backing off of it today, and no one knows why. The audience says, just say the word. There's no commercials.
Well,
on this show.
YouTube gets upset.
Do they? Okay. Well, F you, YouTube. How about
I mean,
that?
I don't get upset. I don't care.
Right. It doesn't bother you at all.
It doesn't bother me if you get thrown off.
Right, that's true. And really, honestly, what's YouTube doing for us? Besides, probably even owned by Russia, for all I know. So, all right. Well, that's pretty incredible, and I hope they hang all those guys.
Now,
Eastman
a couple
really
of
made
things
a
I
huge
just want to
mistake
finish
here.
up on, and this is like lightning round
I have
time.
a
Just
note.
a couple of quickies here.
Okay.
Rome, Georgia.
All right.
Rome News Tribune. There can be no place for bigotry or hate, especially in our representatives. This is a tirade against Marjorie, 3 names.
Oh.
Our representative in Congress recently appeared as a guest at the America First Political Action Conference in Orlando. The America First PAC is where the white nationalist thing went down during CPAC. An event organized by Nick Fuentes, a person who's been described as a white supremacist by the Anti-Defamation League. During the conference, for example, Nick Fuentes compared Putin to Hitler and then added, as if that's a bad thing.
All right.
To give you an idea of what's going on here. So after speaking at the
Has
event,
to be
Green posed for photo with Fuentes, but when questioned about her appearance and relationship with Fuentes, Green denied she knew him. I'm not going to play the guilt by association game. I'm not going to turn down the opportunity to speak to 1,200 young America First patriots because of a few off-color remarks by another speaker, even if I find those remarks unsavory. So they turned on her and got really pissed off. Let us be clear. That happened. There was commentary afterwards from those folks. Let us be clear when they say that denial of the Holocaust and anti-Semitic language are not just off-color remarks. They're not just unsavory. For a member of Congress to speak at an event organized by and then posing for a photo with somebody the Anti-Defamation League describes as a white supremacist sends a message. It emboldens those who subscribe to those beliefs. And goes on to say, this is terrible. And what about us? Where's our voice here in the 14th District? We have none.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they're upset about it. Not that a newspaper account or editorial makes a huge difference here, but she's not winning any friends at home. So in another thing that we talked about the other day about the ridiculousness of fact checkers, and it gives you an idea how some in the mainstream media really get things wrong here. This is Blake Hounshell, New York Times political reporter. I was surprised, he writes, to learn via Harvard's Matthew Baum that Democrats are more likely to rally around a Republican president than the other way around.
Are you really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're a professional. You're supposed to know this stuff. You didn't know that?
I was surprised to find out you were surprised to find that out, I guess. Wow. All right. Good morning, Blake. Happy birthday.
Right? Aaron Astor writes about a ADP report. ADP report, January total revised, and tomorrow's job's Friday, by the way. January total revised, 509,000 jobs added instead of 301,000 lost.
For when?
That's an 800,000 job correction from January.
I don't even remember being told that we had job losses for January, though.
Well,
quite
that's
honestly.
because you go by the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics official government report, which is more accurate. The ADP report comes out a few days beforehand and sets the expectations
private report
for what the government report is going to say.
Well, that's a mistake.
So they were off by 800,000.
Is that a lot?
And that's a lot.
Okay.
And so,
okay.
I'm to me, what occurred to me is the difference between an estimate and a forecast and a model.
All right.
Okay.
What is it?
So Blake Hounshell estimates that Republicans and Democrats are the same.
Sure. All right. Yeah.
Right. which is not based on fact. It's based on Chris Cillizza deciding what's relevant and what's not relevant.
Mm-hmm.
A forecast is when Dave Wasserman goes district by district and looks to see what's going on in each district and then comes to the conclusion that, well, probably the Republicans are going to win by about, 20 seats or so, that for the most part, it looks like the environment we're in, but we'll see what happens as things change.
Okay.
And a model is, well, we looked at redistricting, and it looks like it's a wash, that the Democrats gained as many seats as the Republicans, so that's not the reason they win or lose. Those are all different things. They can all be wrong. They can all be right and say the same thing. But what happens is if the model that says that the Democrats really don't gain or lose by redistricting turns out to be true, and Chris Cillizza writes a column in his gut estimation, it's probably not going to make that much difference in terms of redistricting, then the election happens and that turns out to be the correct thing that happened, then the Cilizzas of the world say, look, I was right. 50% of the time they're not.
Right.
And that's actually, data that people have collected. The pundits are right half the time. But they're convinced they're right because the data and the forecast and the model matched my gut feeling, so I'm really good at this. 50% of the time.
Okay.
So there's a difference between an estimate and a forecast and a model. These job numbers are all estimates. They don't have enough data to really know. And then 3 months later, they collect enough data to build a model, then they know. And that's why they're always so off.
All right.
And what does it mean? It means that you shouldn't take what you hear about jobs seriously until a couple of months after when they do the final corrections.
Yeah,
why do they release them so early? I don't know. They always do.
It gets you a lot of attention. ADP becomes a famous company because they do this stuff. They're supposed to have access to some of their own data about who's getting paid how much and how many of you are getting paychecks.
But that's like looking to see who Googles about COVID as a substitute for CDC estimates of how prevalent it is in the community.
I guess. I mean, it's good.
It's good.
Data.
It's not nothing. But it may or may not be correct. It's an estimate.
It's a good question. Are they just outdated? Like, as I'm saying it, I'm realizing, there's a whole generation and another one coming up that's like, I don't understand what you mean. Paychecks? Checks? Like, what are you talking about here? What is that? Oh, yes. Right. Well, some of it's direct deposit, but yes, this is the way they used to pay people. Oh, you mean before, like, whatever the hell else we got now going on? What are the kids using these days? Damn it, I can't remember.
So when we were having these huge swings about setting expectations for bad job numbers, and then the jobs numbers were terrific, and then it turned out that the previous month's jobs numbers were ratcheted up, I posed the question to some of the experts I know on Twitter, why are we using these numbers if they're always wrong? And their answer was, they've always been wrong. You go back 20, 30 years, and I used to do this in the Senate, they're always wrong. This isn't something new. And they said it in terms of the cynicism of, what are you getting so upset about the numbers being wrong? They're always wrong. Yeah. And I'm looking at it from the terms of, if the numbers are always wrong, why are you using them?
That's a good question. Like, why
do we do this?
Don't have this reputation, why not reporting it as people do? And
why don't
saying,
you report
keep in mind,
why don't you start now
wrong.
Reporting January, because by now it's accurate.
Yeah.
Why are you releasing yesterday's number when you know they're wrong?
Because they're here. I don't want to wait for numbers.
Because we've always done it that way, and why are you questioning this? So. It's part of
Maybe they're just not all that wrong all the time.
Yeah, well, sometimes they're right. Well, estimates, forecasts, and models. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. But you guys aren't doing just an estimate when you do the government stuff. That's, based on a model. Mm-hmm. But ADP is doing an estimate. They don't have enough data to know.
They don't pay everyone.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's probably based on something a little bit like, I don't know. Well, I'm wondering if they base it
I'm just saying,
polling,
people have to get used to the fact that these numbers don't mean what you think they mean. And it's important because the political pundits like Cillizza and the rest, they're going, oh, my God, do you know what this means for the election in November?
Right.
No, I don't, because I don't even know that it's accurate. Yes, but we're going to trumpet it, and we'll never, ever, ever talk about the correction.
Or stop.
I told you there was an 800,000 job correction for ADP for January. Are you hearing about that on the news? Of course not. That's old news. It's January. What do we don't kind of report that.
We don't care about that. What about?
Yeah.
Well, that is pretty amazing, and I wonder, maybe it is a little bit like polling. They say we only have a certain slice of data, but it's a representative enough sample. We, pay people in all 50 states, big companies, small companies,
and it's an estimate, and they're wrong a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not the same thing as a model.
No, but the question is, are they, wrong a lot, but within one standard deviation usually?
Wrong a lot
but
in the same direction. I mean, there's a lot of questions you can ask about it, but don't hang your hat on the number.
Okay. I don't have a hat.
Well, yeah.
However, if
you're in the wax museum in Paris, you don't even have a head.
Right.
Let alone a hat.
Right. Where the hell am I supposed to hang my hat? I don't have a head. So, it's a new question.
It's interesting that and this was Putin in a suit. It wasn't Putin on a horse, bare-chested. Oh. Because if they replaced Putin's head with Zelensky's head in that wax museum, luckily it's a suit.
Right. I mean, are they really the same
Otherwise,
body
it would
shape?
look really
I don't
silly.
know. Well, I guess so. It just goes to prove that the suit doesn't mean as much as we think. Or maybe I don't know, maybe it does. It's the basic unit of politician. Switch the heads.
I saw the picture and the video of them removing the head. They did a really nice job. It's pretty lifelike.
Yeah. Must be weird. All right, send me that video if you find it again. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I did, but
experience to watch.
Buried in there. But I'll see if I can find it. Anyway,
okay. Yes.
That's the story for me.
Right.
Don't have anything else, and besides, it's the end of the hour.
Yeah, that's true too. Okay. Well,
I did find it. I did send it to you. I'm putting it at the end so you could find it easy.
I will look at it and marvel at it during the break. I want to throw out just one thing. We haven't really touched on it yet, and maybe I can read an article on it. But out in Wisconsin, at the very moment that they're finally, smashing and debunking all of the legal theories and academic niceties that were protecting the people who were spreading the big lie, Donald Trump himself and all the people acting on his behalf. In Wisconsin, a former Supreme Court justice is special counsel there, still pressing the same election fraud theory and pressing forward basically with exactly what Eastman was pressing and saying Wisconsin can go and decertify their electors and continue with this fight. And it's ludicrous, but still happening. But maybe this finally diffuses it.
He was a nutter as a judge.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. If the Twitter machine will work, I just want to oh, God, that is really disturbing. Watching the video that Greg mentioned and sent it to me, I just retweeted it. If you're listening live, you can check it out. I put the KITM hashtag on it, and wow, it's gross and weird. I don't know if I would say that was the greatest likeness of Putin, although I haven't really studied his face. But, it's certainly very lifelike. It's like an AI-generated Putin face, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, it's really weird. And he just, casually detaches the head and sticks it in a box. And now they're preparing for Zelensky. I guess. Do they already have the wax head? Are they going to put it on in the middle of this video? I guess not. They're just talking about that it's going to eventually be there next to Biden. And then they briefly flashed away to some of the other, I guess, wax models that they have. And I was like, is that another person who works at the museum, or is it ew, wow. They are pretty creepy. Anyway, yeah. Oh, there's another one. You're sending me more pictures. All right, let's see. Is that the wax figure, or is that that's the real guy? Is that for comparison? Because he's seated in this picture, so I assume it's the real guy. All right. And lifelike. I mean, yeah, I guess so. No? Real guy. Okay. Both the real guy. These two, I'm having half a conversation. This is really good for the radio. But okay, all right, so that's comparison. I guess I'll have to watch the video again. They usually do a pretty good job with these things. I don't know. See here, maybe this is a younger Putin. How old is this wax figure? At any rate, I guess I've never also seen Putin tends to tip his head back. I never saw the top of his head like that. is taken. The cameraman filming him is taller than the wax figure. And is that what the top of Putin's head looks like? I don't know. Anyway, not important right now, but you can compare them for yourselves. Well, on your own time, damn it, because I have so many other things to get to. Let's see. I should scroll through all of Greg's stories because I have the feeling that we probably didn't get to everything that was on his list. But I don't know, Greg, maybe you can give me notes about anything that you wanted to get to but didn't. And I can scroll back through. I'm going to go back to Pocket, and it's full of tweets. Like, it's almost all tweets. So this is difficult. So I have to click in to see what they were and remind myself, why did I put this one aside? And we'll try and get through these things quickly. Right. Oh, yes. This, a tweet from Jennifer Griffin, the Fox News Channel reporter who we read about the other day, getting upset with and correcting Fox News Channel opinion types on the air and saying, you guys are out of your minds. You don't know what's going on. I have to correct you all the time with the facts. So that makes her, I guess, one of the better people over at Fox News Channel. She's tweeting this observation from this morning. Sergei Lavrov speaking. What is he? Is he the foreign minister? Is that the guy? Out there in Russia. Out there in Russia. Huh, how you doing? Sergei Lavrov with a straight face, and then his quote, in Kharkiv, there are no Russian troops. Now, the news this morning was that the Russians had, in fact, taken Kharkiv, and yet he's out there saying, there are no Russian troops there. And then he goes on to say, you like the word murderer. Kiev regime, those are the real murderers. Zelensky, yes, he is a Nazi and a neo-Nazi because he's on their side. Orwell weeps, says Jennifer Griffin, and probably so. It's, what can you do? They're stuck having to lie for the regime and for themselves to preserve their own lives, no doubt. But that's where we are. The Russians just simply, lying through their teeth about what's going on and what they're doing in Ukraine and who's playing what role here. Just thought that one was kind of an interesting illustration of what we're dealing with. So we're not going to get a lot of straight news out of them. What else? That was an interesting one. I don't know if that's the next piece to bring up necessarily, but scroll through a couple other things. Oh, is this the email that Greg was reading before? I have Josh Dawsey's tweet with the email exchange between them, but, for one thing, it's very small. I guess it's a little bit more of their exchange, which is interesting. And maybe we should continue with that because their exchange was so interesting. What am I looking at here? Here's John Eastman's email to Greg Jacob. Starting off, okay. So I guess maybe this will hint at the part. Greg, you'll be interested in this. Not Greg Jacob, but Greg Dworkin. Greg Jacob already knows what's in here, but maybe this explains what Greg Jacob thinks he's apologizing for. And starts out with this, and I'll censor it a little bit here. But Eastman writing on January 6th, it's 12:25. 12:25 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, MST, is the timestamp here. So that's interesting. And that's 2:25 p.m. in Washington, D.C. I mean, that's right in the thick of things. And Eastman's, the first piece here in this exhibit is Eastman writing to Jacob with this reply. Although because it's the Greg Jacob, the initial, there's a whole email chain here. So, I'm wondering whether I should stop here and because I don't want to read it in backwards chronological order. How long is this exhibit? We start down at the bottom here. Okay, so we'll do it in reverse chronological order here. On January 5th at 9:32 p.m., John Eastman wrote, and this is the quote in, Greg's response to him. So he's responding to Eastman's writing, Greg, good talk earlier tonight. Major new development attached. This is huge, as it now looks like the Pennsylvania legislature will vote to recertify its electors if Vice President Pence implements the plan we discussed. And you all know what the plan was. It's bull crap, but it's a plan. Give me a call once you've had your sit down with the VP and let me know where we stand. Again, thank you, John. And then there's an attached PDF here, U.S. Republican Leadership Letter, PDF. And I guess that's a letter from somebody in the Pennsylvania legislature hinting that, oh, yeah, Pennsylvania is totally going to do this. And remember that we also heard very quickly, no, Pennsylvania is really not going to do this. But this is his last-ditch effort to sell. You know, he's taking his own theory very seriously, and that, of course, is what Greg Jacob takes him to task for eventually. This is dangerous. I understand the academic interest in wild theories, but this thing needs to be hashed out elsewhere before you present it to the President of the United States and say, I think it'll work, but even if it doesn't work, we can always just make it work by taking to the streets and imposing it by force. And, you know, as a lawyer, you probably shouldn't be advising that. So anyway, Greg answers in the morning, January 6th, 10:44 a.m. Eastern Time. Thanks, John. We'll call. Is it constitutional for the ECA, Electoral Count Act, to direct that the members should do objections, at least in the first instance? Would the constitutional imperative you argue for not kick in only after that statutorily required mechanism has been applied and failed to uphold the Constitution? Sent from his iPhone. He's doing it on the fly. What are we talking about here? Is it unconstitutional for the Electoral Count Act to direct that members should do objections? I don't know whether he's pressing Eastman about his theory about how the Electoral Count Act can be changed, or they don't need to do the objections, that the vice president can just rule directly. I don't know. With the constitutional imperative you argue for not kick in only after that statutorily required mechanism has been applied and failed to uphold the Constitution. Well, let's go on with this. The next answer, I guess, is Eastman writing back, I'm sorry, Greg, but this is small-minded. You're sticking with minor procedural statutes, really, while the Constitution is being shredded. I gave you the Lincoln example yesterday. Here's another. In the Situation Room at the White House during the first Iraq War, the Secretary of the Interior said the law required an environmental impact assessment before the president could order bombing of the Iraq oil fields. Technically true, but nonsense. Luckily, Bush got statesmanship advice and ignored the statutory requirement. Interesting. So once a statute was ignored in a totally different situation, so in this totally different situation, you can ignore the statute. The situations, of course, Eastman is arguing that they're both similar because the Constitution itself is at stake. Except, you know, not everyone actually accepts that, and you're really going to have to establish that as a given before you can just say, yeah, everybody has to do things my way. All right, let's see. Then Greg Jacob answers, now 12:14 p.m., January 6th. John, very respectfully, I just don't in the end believe that there is a single justice on the United States Supreme Court, maybe he's naive about this, or a single judge on any of our courts of appeals who is as, quote, broad-minded as you when it comes to the irrelevance of statutes enacted by the United States Congress and followed without exception for more than 130 years. They cannot be set aside except when in direct conflict with the Constitution that our revered framers handed us. And very respectfully, I don't think that a single one of those framers would agree with your position either. Certainly Judge Ludwig has made clear that he does not, and there is no reasonable argument that the Constitution directs or empowers the Vice President to set a procedure followed for 130 years before it has even been resorted to. I guess set aside, maybe, a procedure followed for 130 years before it has even been resorted to. So here at first, I guess, is, yeah, we don't actually have to bother with the whole objections from the floor and from members of Congress and vote on those things. And it doesn't matter how that vote comes out. We can just have the vice president start ruling directly. I guess, call for those fake certificates to be brought in and say, maybe we should accept these, and I'll just rule that we should. That's pretty aggressive. I don't even know that ever really came to light before. But where were we? Oh, yes. He's Greg Jacob now saying Lincoln suspended the writ, that is, I guess, writ of habeas corpus. That comes up all the time, right, in the conservative mind. Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus during the Civil War, and so you can do almost anything you want in an emergency. If the emergency is bad enough, you can throw out all the laws and even parts of the Constitution if you want to. That must have been, I gave you the Lincoln example last night. Yeah, well, it didn't really mean anything to me because we're not currently in a civil war, and we will be if you just do this thing. But at least Lincoln waited until he was in one. But he responds to that by saying, Lincoln suspended the writ when the body entrusted with that authority was out of session, Congress, that is, and submitted it to them as soon as it returned. I understand your argument that several state legislatures were out of session, but the role for state legislatures has, for our entire history, ended at the time that electoral certificates are submitted to Congress. Even before then, I would argue, but okay, because it's the Electoral College that's submitting the certificates to Congress. State legislature, really the role of the state legislature ends when they decide the manner of election of the Electoral College. When they say we're going to have an election in this state, or coin toss, or appoint our electors, whatever it is that they do, whatever they opt for, once the mechanism is in place, that's kind of it. They don't really have much power to change the mechanism after that. We go to the polls. They're counted. I mean, they can certainly adopt statutes that govern how, in many ways, how the election is conducted and what mechanisms are valid and what are not for collecting and counting and processing the votes and the counts and how you report them and all of that, and what hours, if they want to, they can do that. But that shouldn't be confused, as Republicans would like you to do, with the obligation to, or the prerogative to, select the manner in which the electors will be selected. Once they choose election, they can generally prescribe procedures for how elections will be conducted inside the state, but they can't go back and say, except for this one, which is not going to happen this way, even though we've already held it. We're going to undo it. That is way beyond their abilities, I think. I mean, they can try and do whatever they want. They do have that plenary power, but that doesn't mean anybody has to accept what they have to say. You might have a very wrong view of the United States Constitution. You might be dead on the Pennsylvania Constitution. You could also be wrong about that. But you don't really have a leg to stand on when it comes to interpreting the U.S. Constitution in the face of a denial from the courts, anyway. So he goes on, and he says, Lincoln suspended the writ when the body entrusted with that authority was out of session and submitted it to them as soon as he returned. I understand your argument that several state legislatures were out of session to deal with the Electoral College, that is. But the role for state legislators has, for our entire history, ended at the time that the electoral certificates are submitted to Congress. Congress has debated submissions, including competing submissions. It has never once referred them out to state legislatures to decide. Right. That's the big issue here. Is the procedure is these certificates are now in the hands of Congress. Congress will decide what to do with them. There's a whole rule book for what to do with them. Legislation, and no contemplation in the legislation or the Constitution anywhere that the process can be reversed and done over again by the states. And that's what he says. That to send them back to the states for them to adjudicate as between the competing slates of electors, or whether or not the one slate that they sent is valid or not. You had your chance. December 14th was it, and that's over now. But he goes on to say, I respect your heart here. I share your concerns about what Democrats will do once in power. He's not a genius guy, but okay. I respect your concerns about what Democrats will do once in power. And hasn't it been awful, by the way? I want election integrity fixed. but I have run down every legal trail placed before me to its conclusion, and I respectfully conclude that as a legal framework, it is a results-oriented position, like Armando always told you it was, that you would never support if attempted by the opposition, and essentially entirely made up. And thanks to your BS, he uses the full dirty, naughty word for it, we are now under siege. And that's the end of it. And that's what he has to apologize for. Because Eastman responds almost right away. Well, actually, it takes him about, if the timestamps are all the same, then it just takes him a few minutes. But otherwise, it takes him a couple hours to respond. Eastman says, my BS, using the naughty word, my BS, in quotes, seriously? You think you can't adjourn the session because the Electoral College Act says no adjournment, while the compelling evidence that the election was stolen continues to build and is already overwhelming, period, because that should be a question mark. The, quote, siege is because you, all caps, and your boss did not do what was necessary to allow this to be aired in a public way so the American people can see for themselves what happened. That right there is Eastman is completely gone. He's QAnon'd out. His intellectual capacity has been erased. He's a QAnon whack job at this point. And I guess that's pretty startling. And I guess later is I apologize for using strong language kind of thing. It must be what Greg was talking about in reading about that. But then he goes on to dismiss this thing, again, very properly. But right there, that's why it says it's Exhibit L. If you read it in non-chronological order, what comes first on the page, Exhibit L in this document is Eastman's thing saying, oh yeah, you think you can't adjourn the session just because the law says you can't adjourn the session? That's essentially what he's saying here. You think you can't adjourn the session because the Electoral College Act, a statute, says no adjournment. And Eastman's argument is, well, of course you can adjourn even though the law says you can't adjourn. Because emergency stuff. Don't you see the compelling evidence? The pillow guy says it's all there. Why aren't you adjourning? That is literally what he's saying. And, wow, the patience of a saint, I guess, if not the political outlook of a saint. From Greg Jacobs saying, oh, well, I'm sorry I used the word BS. But, look, that guy's a complete moron. You belong in a loony bin. That's what he should have said to him. But instead he says, gee whiz, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, whatever. He's trying to advance the point. So that was pretty exciting. What a fun exchange that was. Let's see. Let me throw this in here next, because why not? Take us back to Ukraine. Again, it's all one story. And I don't know about the foundation of this one, but I thought it was interesting to share. I don't know, why this guy has access to this information and exactly what he's reading, but it's a possibility, so I'll throw it in there. Yuri Akopov is my best guess at the pronunciation of this guy's name, and his Twitter bio tells me nothing about him. So I don't know. But he says, I have spent some time last night reading Russian nationalist accounts. And then he explains, parenthetically, the well-versed, quote, intellectual ones, not normie Putin fans. And here is a quick summary of what they think. So I guess we're talking about Russian nationalist, intellectuals, as opposed to just, I don't know, I like Putin, he's strong. This is what they're saying about the situation, right? We heard all about the Ukrainians are cautiously optimistic. They're more hopeful because they've lasted a week. But, how long can it go on, I guess, is one question. And, the optimists say forever. And there's reason to believe that some of that, well, certainly longer, if not forever. But anyway, listen to what the Russians are telling themselves, and that's important to know. Inside Russia, among the, intellectual nationalists, if there is such a thing, they say, one, the war is expected to be over in days or weeks at most. Still, they do still think this. And maybe they're right, so watch out. The main bulk of Ukrainian forces in the east is going to be encircled soon, and the main cities are already under siege. The losses are admitted to be higher than expected, but it changes nothing. The possibility of resistance after the active phase of the war is dismissed. They are confident that after there is a change of power and Ukrainian activists are purged by military police, most people in Ukraine will come to their senses and accept the new reality. They've had to do that in the past. This was the war. The war is existential. It's a typo, so I'm trying to fix it on the fly. The war is existential in a way that it is supposed to destroy the Ukrainian identity. The desired outcome seems to be not a friendly Ukraine with a new government, but at least partial annexation with Ukrainian culture suppressed. Now, that's interesting in that it's the expectation of the intellectual Russian nationalists that that's what's going to happen. I think that's beyond what our American, realpolitik people think is happening here. Let's see. And also it was interesting to see the comment that the war is existential. I usually hear that in terms of Russians saying it like, well, it's because they feel they're threatened on their borders and they've always had this historical worry about this and they like to have buffer states, et cetera, et cetera. But this is different. The war is existential. The war is viewed by Russian nationalists as existential from the Ukrainian point of view. That is, this is a war to exterminate Ukrainian independence as a concept. Implementing what Putin has said in his speeches, that there is no independent Ukraine, that an independent Ukraine is a geopolitical fiction, I think was the line. And I guess they buy into that, which is interesting and will come as a surprise to some of the soldiers who are there, according to reports we've heard earlier. So now there's more. There is no talk of a nuclear or further wars yet in these circles. This, so far, can only be found, albeit quite easily, in the normie accounts. That is, the regular Putin fan, people who are just walking around minding their workaday business in Russia. But they all think, oh yeah, well, we can always pull out the nuclear arsenal and expand even beyond that and retake the Baltics too. Like, hooray, hooray for Putin. They don't believe in that in the intellectual circles, although I guess they could contemplate it happening, but they're quite fixed on the idea of erasing the idea of an independent Ukraine. So, there's no talk of nuclear or further wars in these circles, can only be found among the normie accounts. Europe arming Ukraine, though, as is happening now, is seen like a futile exercise. That is to say, too little, too late, rather than a casus belli. That is, we don't need to worry about what are we going to do to hold the rest of Europe to account for the effrontery of arming the Ukrainians. It won't make a difference. Sure, we could take it out on them. We could have a war with them. We could fight, but we'll have gotten what we came here for, and there's no point in going on with expanding the war against the rest of the West. What about sanctions? Well, they are widely considered to be survivable thanks to preparations made since 2014, when the sanctions began, when they invaded Crimea. And the most severe ones are expected to be lifted soon after Ukraine is defeated. Russian billionaires forced to move to Russia with their money in order to, actually get it out of the bank, whatever's left to them, is considered to be great. Like, all right, we're bringing everybody back to our shores along with their money. Autarky is believed to be good. The focus is mostly on tech, with explanations how Yandex, I guess that's their stock exchange. What is Yandex? I don't even know. Now that I think about it, let's see. Open this up, please. Give me another tab. Yandex. What is Yandex? Yandex is I see. I don't know what it was. It's a search engine, a Russian search engine, like Russians Google, I guess. Okay, that's funny. I had to look it up on Google. Well, anyway. Let's jump back to this here. All right, so autarky. And remember, we looked that up the other day, too, and I forget what it is already. I think that was the idea of self-sufficiency, right? Economic independence or self-sufficiency, which I guess is what they think is going to come of the sanctions. They'll be cut off from everything. They'll just simply make the stuff they need themselves. Autarky is believed to be good. The focus is mostly on tech, with explanations of how Yandex, the search engine, can provide everything Russia needs. Imports from China are expected to cover all reasonable needs in goods, and domestic manufacturing is expected to boom. Overall, in other words, a complete dehumanization of Ukraine. Dismissal rather than aggressive challenge and aggressive challenging of the West, yesterday's hegemon, and the start of a Russian golden era. I personally think they, alas, might be right about what will happen to Ukraine and how soon. Less confident about the rest. Okay, well, that's a very dangerous possibility, but we got to keep that in mind. It is entirely possible that the military might of Russia might be too much eventually. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back, everybody. I began the show and the mute button was on. But welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Let's roll into the next thing that I will share with you. I gave you that. I give you, just for the sake of having it available, the warning that yes, Russia has a pretty giant military, and even if the equipment that they're using isn't all that great and not in the best repair, we'll talk about that in a second, using conscripts, etc., it's still pretty huge. And the Ukrainian armed forces, I mean, the armed forces proper aren't large enough on paper to make this thing work. But, you know, I mean, an armed citizenry. And where are my Second Amendment patriots? It's interesting how the Second Amendment patriots originally cast themselves on the side of the tyrannical government, squashing the people who were arming themselves to fight tyranny, but have since switched because they read the popular sentiment on the wall, but they might not be reading the reality of the situation. And it'll be interesting to watch them switch back if it becomes necessary to becoming pro-Russian and pro-invasion again. Okay, so it's difficult to believe, although, again, we're cautioned that we were just reading the opinion of Russian nationalists, so of course they're going to think that. Are there countervailing examples that might lead you to believe that the Russian military can't pull this off? I mean, besides Afghanistan. But that's a pretty good counter. I mean, there you have it. That should wrap it up for you. But a Twitter thread circulating yesterday, and I saw it yesterday and passed it around and said, wow, that sounds fun. And I've gotten it back now. You know how well this thing circulated. Bruce McFarland has sent it to make sure that I have it, and I'm glad that he did. Not that I had, I'm not saying, oh, I already saw it. Why are you sending it to me? Because now it was in my KITM hashtag Twitter column, and it was easy to find, even though I hadn't pocketed the thing. So thank you, Bruce, for parking this here. It is the very interesting tweet thread of Trent Telenko, who's a little Russian-sounding himself, but is at least currently American. and maybe of Russian or even Ukrainian extraction is Telenko. I'm trying to think of whether or not I think that's a Ukrainian-sounding name or some other Russian nationality that, I don't know. I'm not good at identifying all that. But he is quite American. Identifies himself on Twitter as, in addition to being the married father of 4 great kids. And I would dispute that. I don't know any of your kids. I'm kidding. I'm sure they are great kids. But you could probably give us a couple examples of when they weren't so great. Maybe one time we'll talk about that. But a retired U.S. Department of Defense civil servant, and that is where his perspective on this thing comes from. We'll assume that he knows what he's talking about and read this thing. Oh, we got to go back to finding. All right, so he says this is a thread that will explain the implied poor Russian army truck maintenance practices based on this photo of a Pantsir S-1 wheeled gun missile systems right rear pair of tires below and the operational implications during the Ukrainian mud season. So that was a little dense, but what's happening here is he's got a picture that's in circulation of this thing called, I don't know what, a Pantsir, P-A-N-T-S-I-R, S-1 wheeled gun missile systems. It's a gigantic truck-based weapon system, the best you can tell. You know, it's like one of those mobile missile launching things that will launch a giant barrage of missiles. And the truck it's on is enormous and heavy and complicated looking. And it is pictured here, 1, stuck in the mud, and 2, you might not notice this initially, but the right rear tire, and this is at least 3-axled vehicle. There might be more. The picture cuts off, but it's a big, heavy truck, so it's got multiple axles, more than 2. And, well, that's what multiple means, but you know what I'm saying here. And, but the rearmost tire, I guess, if the description is accurate, is the tire is entirely torn off of the wheel and stuck in the mud and jammed up in the wheel well behind. This thing is hopelessly stuck. And by the way, as others have observed in seeing this thing, the right front tire doesn't look all that good either. It looks like the axle might be bent, but who knows? Well, anyway, Trent is going to call our attention to that tire at the back and tell us why this is more interesting than just, hey, look at that truck is stuck in the mud. For the sin of being the new guy, he begins, I was the DCMA, and I don't even know what we're talking about here. Let's see if we can pull up it's going to be a lot of acronyms in this because it's military. Defense Contract Management Agency. There we go. I was the DCMA. Got to find my way back to the thread here. Oh, you know what? I should move this thread out of the Twitter app and onto the a browser window instead. It's easier to find again. So, for the sin of being the new guy, I was the DCMA quality auditor in charge of the U.S. Army's FMTV. Another thing to look up. Should we bother doing this? FMTV. Family of Medium Tactical Vehicles. Did you really need to? All right, whatever. So here we are. I was the Defense Contracting Management Agency auditor in charge of the U.S. Army's Family of Military Tactical Vehicles Vehicle Exercise Program at the contractor manufacturing them from the mid-1990s to the mid-2000s. Then we got more new guys. So he didn't have to do it after that. So anyway, short form, he says, military trucks need to be turned over and moved once a month for preventative maintenance reasons. This is like good nuts and bolts logistics here. In particular, you want to exercise the Central Tire Air Inflation System, CTIS. It has its own acronym. To see if the lines have leaks or have had insect or vermin nests blocking the system. That's an interesting thing I hadn't thought about being a possibility. But it's basically a, cockpit-controlled tire pressure inflation and deflation system, because if you're driving off-road, you're going to do some off-road, and that happens in the military from time to time. And sometimes you need, run into softer terrain, and you got to deflate, you got to take air out of the tires so that the four-wheel drive systems will engage, and the powertrain can, move your tires. You don't want them inflated all the way like you do for road driving. You want to deflate them a little bit, better tire grip and traction. So, right, you don't want to have to stop your convoy and everybody get out and let air out of your tires and then start driving again. And then when you get back on the road, stop and everybody get out and hand pump the tires back up. You got an automated system for that, so you can do it on the fly. So, as it says here, you got to check them once a month and make sure that your CTIS system is working. And more than that, another of the big reasons for repositioning and moving the trucks around, per TACCOM Logistics, all right, per TACCOM Logistic Representatives. Who's TACCOM? All right, let's look it up. Here we go. U.S. Army TACCOM is a major subordinate command of Materiel Command, manages the Army's ground equipment supplies, and which constitutes about 60% of So what does TACCOM stand for itself? Tank, Automotive, and Armaments Command. All your vehicles. Okay, just keeping on top of the acronyms here. So one of the biggest reasons for repositioning per TACCOM Logistics Representatives was that direct sunlight ages truck tires. You might know about that if you've got a truck that you park outside all the time. You're not parking in your living room, right? Repositioning of trucks in close parking, right? If you park them side by side, a whole bunch of them, it prevents a lot of this sun rotting, and cycling the CTIS keeps the tire sidewalls supple. So you're not using all your tanks and all your trucks and all the mobile armaments and stuff all the time for wars. We do it a lot, but not all the time. You park them side by side. The ones on the outside are going to get all the sunlight on their tires. And, the resulting slow but sure deterioration can happen, especially if you're not routinely inflating and deflating the tires, checking not only the tire inflation system, but as he says, keeping the sidewalls of the tire supple. So you want to do that. Plus, you want to move the things around so that different trucks and different vehicles are on the outside of the side-by-side parking, so that the ones that were previously out in the sun can get the shade for the next period of time, and the ones that were in the shade absorb some of the sun. Everybody gets a little bit of the deterioration. And you check the CTIS system. So, when you leave military truck tires in one place for months on end, the sidewalls get rotted or brittle, such that using low tire pressure setting for any appreciable distance, any off-road driving, will cause the tires to fail catastrophically via rips in the sidewalls. And he says, take a look at these earlier videos, for instance, and the picture that they just showed you. And if this is one of those vehicles, then we're also, we get a better view of it now. It is 4 axles on these things, not just 3. So anyway, in the picture we saw before, one of the right rear tires was off, but there's another axle behind that. I don't know whether the tires are torn off of that one too. But this is, in fact, a video that he embeds here of a Russian Pantsir S1 Shorad. Should we look up what Shorad means? Abandoned by its crew and seized by Ukrainian forces. We're going to get a good look at short-range air defense, Shorad. Isn't that cool? So tactical. We love it. All right. Trent goes on and says, now look at the same Pantsir S1 tire sidewalls after the Ukrainians tried to tow or drive it out of the mud. They got stuck in the mud. The Russians abandoned it. And at that point, I guess this is the same one. When they abandoned it, it had all its tires. It was just stuck. But the Ukrainians tried to move it, and tire blows out and just tears straight off of the wheel assembly. Look at the same Pantsir S1 tire sidewalls after the Ukrainians tried to tow or drive it out of the mud. The right rear tire fell apart because the rips in it were too big for the CTIS to keep it aired up. No one exercised, he says, that vehicle for 1 year. I guess that's his estimate. That's what would cause those tires to become so brittle. So, there's a huge operational level implication in this. If the Russian army was too corrupt or lazy or whatever to exercise a Pantsir S1, they were too corrupt to exercise the trucks and wheeled AFVs now in Ukraine. AFVs? Something vehicles? AFV? Anyone? It's not America's Funniest Home Videos. That's the first guess. No. Let's see. Well, I don't know if that's going to come up or not. But anyway, okay, so some various military vehicles. So basically, he's just saying it's likely that this is systemic for the Russians. If the Russian army was too corrupt to exercise a Pantsir S1, which by the looks of it appears to be a pretty important vehicle for combat, then they were probably too corrupt to exercise the trucks and wheeled vehicles now in Ukraine of all kinds. The Russians simply cannot then risk those vehicles off-road during the muddy season, which I guess has its own name in Ukraine or in Russia. I don't know. Rasputitsa. That's Rasputitsa. I assume that is what he means. It's put here as Rasputitsa / mud season. So we'll take that for what it means here. I've clicked on things trying to get a hold of that word so that we could look it up just to be sure. Wikipedia says it's a Russian term for 2 seasons of the year, spring and autumn, when travel on unpaved roads or across country become difficult because of the mud. Okay, so that's what we thought. Continuing on then. Trent now says there's photographic evidence of this, and there is. You remember that supposedly giant convoy moving to Kyiv? And everyone thought, wow, look at the size of this convoy. They must really have the devastation of Kyiv in mind. And then we found out, well, it might actually be that this isn't one giant convoy, but several smaller, normal-sized convoys, because it did seem like militarily, why would you do that? Doesn't sound like a good idea. More in keeping with regular military practices, several small convoys, but apparently they all backed up into one another because of how much trouble they're having staying fueled, staying organized, staying on time, keeping everybody fed and well cared for, and it's sort of morphed into this giant traffic jam instead. So as he was saying, there's a huge operational implication to this. If the Russian army was too corrupt to exercise those vehicles and the wheels, the tires, then they can't risk going off-road. And the photographic evidence is that now 60 plus, this is not, I thought it was going to be 60 miles, but that 40-mile long convoy, part of the problem here. Here's a picture of 60 plus Russian army tanks crowded and parked on this raised roadbed to avoid the fate of the mud-bogged Pantsir S1. Well, that's going to get in the way of movement, of course. And the whole thing is all parked in this road, which, of course, everybody was wondering, why aren't they bombing this thing? Well, now the Ukrainians can do it. We're not bombing them because we don't want to get involved in a direct shooting war with the Russians. Why aren't Ukrainians? Well, they'll get to it. Now, Trent continues here. Given the demonstrated levels of corruption in truck maintenance, there is no way in hell that there are enough tires in the Russian army logistical system. They're going to lose tires left and right like this if they leave the road. And in order to win a war, you're going to have to be able to leave the road. But if they leave the road, they're going to get stuck in the mud, blow out the tires, and then you have just a simple nuts and bolts logistical problem. We don't have enough tires to replace these things and keep moving. If we do, they're in Russia. We're going to have like transport planes full of tires, and changing these tires is no small thing. These are large, heavy vehicles. You got to have equipment to do this. You can't just jack them up in the mud. Even if you were on the street, you couldn't just jack them up, I don't think, and just change the tires. But even if we could, we can't get that many tires. We're going to run out of tires And for all the military might that the Russians could bring to bear and eventually win this thing, like the nationalists think, for lack of a tire, a war was lost, is essentially what he's saying here. So, he goes on to say, their wheeled AFV/truck park is as road-bound as the Russian army columns were in the First Russo-Finnish War, which has come up in the context of the Ukrainian invasion, or the invasion of Ukraine, I should say. People looking back in history to, they have had a war. Russia invaded Finland in the early days of World War II, and they thought that they would be able to just, roll through and occupy the whole place. But as it turns out, that too, an environmental-based disaster for them. They didn't have the equipment to go off-road, and even when they stayed on the road, they got stuck and were snowbound, and apparently the Finnish army was able to pick them off while they were stalled. So what that means is as long as and wherever the spring Rasputitsa is happening, the Russian army attack front is, I'll embellish a little bit so that you understand it, the Russian army attack front is 3 wheeled AFVs wide. That is to say, they're stuck on the roads. They can't leave the roads or their tires will all blow out. That means the Russian front is however wide the road is. That's it. That's where they're coming. That's where their attack. That will be the territory they hold. The width of the road. When the Ukrainians can block the road with ATGM destroyed vehicles, and that one I think I recognize, anti-tank guided missile destroyed vehicles, they can move down either side of the road like the Finns in 1939. And there's a nice picture of the Finnish army in their snowsuits and on skis and using reindeer-drawn sleds to take out the Russian army. So they can move up and down the sides of the roads at will, destroying Russian truck columns. The Crimea is a desert, and South Ukrainian coastal areas are drier, so we're not seeing this mud problem there. But elsewhere, the Russians have a huge problem for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and that's the conclusion of the tweet thread. But I guess that's actually maybe even a pretty important part of it too. It gets thrown away because it's at the end here. But the next 4 to 6 weeks, the muddy season ends. So maybe in 4 to 6 weeks, if they hold on and they continue with this, they might be operational off-road at that point, and maybe everything begins to change then. So it might not be the end of it to say, this isn't going to work for you. Not now, but maybe later. So that's something to keep in mind too. Maybe the nationalists eventually turn out to be right in this one. All right. Many more other things to share with you, and have to make some editorial decisions on this thing. I saw an interesting piece in the Washington Post that I wanted to share with Greg earlier, but because of what he had shared yesterday with, what was his name? We were talking about, now I forget the guy's name, but I could probably jump back and get it, right? But he was talking about the one pundit who, basically had come to the conclusion that he could never be wrong about anything with respect to the invasion. And I guess international or geopolitical realists is what they consider themselves to be. And what was the guy's name? Like Mishnier, or what was? I can't remember now. Who we were talking about yesterday. I could probably find it in his notes to me on Skype from yesterday. But you remember who we were talking about, right? And that he had been interviewed by, what's his name, who had nailed him so badly. You remember the discussion of yesterday's. There we are. John Mearsheimer. That was it. Mearsheimer being interviewed by Isaac Chotiner, right? And the Washington Post had a piece on that. Can realism explain the war in Ukraine? It was an interesting look at basically what Greg had outlined for us yesterday. So just want to bring that one to your attention. I'll hand it over to you. And it's an interesting follow-up to what we discussed yesterday. Can realism explain the war in Ukraine? Subheader is, when an elegant theory collides with a messy reality. And sounds like good reading in general, and help us explain why no one can seem to explain, at least not among the experts, what's really going on over there. All right. Let's see, other things to share with you. At this point, we'll just jump over to this very weird story that I wasn't anticipating, but has happened nonetheless. United States Representative Van Taylor, Republican of Texas, has ended his re-election campaign, according to the Texas Tribune, after he admits to an affair. But not just any affair. I just had to bring this one to your attention. Apparently, he's, they had their primaries and he didn't make it through without a runoff. So he would have to go through an additional runoff in order to win the nomination again. And he's being challenged from the right, of all places, down there in Texas. So that person is a kook. So they've now deployed their tactical weapon here of telling everybody that they've found out that this guy has had an affair. And maybe that's not enough to drive somebody out of a Republican primary anymore, but this one did. Why? More from the subheader. Taylor made the stunning announcement hours after he finished his 5-way primary with 49% of the vote. Former Collin County Judge Keith Self, who finished second, is now likely to become the next congressman for the 3rd District. And I can tell you, before reading this article, that apparently the story was originally broken by the people at Breitbart, which you should take to mean that they wanted Keith Self or some other lunatic fringe candidate to win, and they're going to take Taylor out as a rhino, even though he's, I'm sure, disgusting reactionary in most of our estimations. They want to take him out and replace him with the lunatic as the nominee, and in Texas that can work. So, what's the dirt? U.S. Representative Van Taylor, Republican of Plano, has decided, did they say Plano? Probably. Has decided to end his re-election campaign after he was forced into a primary runoff amid 11th-hour allegations of infidelity. Taylor made this stunning announcement Wednesday, hours after he finished his 5-way primary with 49% of the vote, just missing the cutoff for winning the primary outright. The runner-up was former Collin County Judge Keith Self, who is now likely to become the next congressman from the 3rd District. And he has this to say. About a year ago, I made a horrible mistake that caused deep hurt and pain among those I love most in the world. Standard stuff so far. Taylor wrote in an email to his supporters, I had an affair. It was wrong, and it was the greatest failure of my life. I want to apologize for the pain I have caused with my indiscretion, most of all to my wife Anne and our 3 daughters. Ugh. But there's more. The day before the primary, the conservative outlet Breitbart News posted a story that Taylor had had a months-long affair with a Plano woman, Tanya Joya, Joya, whom he had paid $5,000 to keep quiet. The publication reported that she provided it a phone screenshot purporting to be communications with Taylor and a bank record showing that she deposited $5,000 into her account. She didn't stay very quiet there. The Texas Tribune has not been able to independently verify the report. Taylor is married with 3 children. Joya is known as a former jihadist. Wow. Who was once married to a commander for the Islamic State. Whoa, he really went overboard on that one. Tabloids have referred to her as the ISIS bride. Efforts to reach Joya were not immediately successful Wednesday. Taylor has until March 16th to remove his name from the runoff ballot, which he plans to do, according to a spokesman. After he does that, Self is automatically the Republican nominee for the district. Wow. I didn't even realize that was the case. Why wouldn't they have a runoff? I don't know. There is a Democratic nominee for the seat, Sandeep Srivastava, but he faces long odds after the district was redrawn last year to favor Republicans, and gosh, don't they all. Taylor, a former state senator, was first elected in 2018 to represent the 3rd Congressional District in the Dallas suburbs. His 4 primary challengers on Tuesday criticized his vote last year for a commission to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. So he was right on that one. Probably wrong on a number of other things, but at least he did that, and that got him bounced. Self got 27% behind Taylor in the primary on Tuesday. He was followed by Suzanne Harp at 21%, and the two remaining challengers were in the low single digits. In his email to supporters, Taylor said he spoke with Self about his decision to end his campaign, and I wish him the best as he seeks to become the next congressman for this district. Self, who served 3 terms as county judge starting in 2007, ran against Taylor as someone who lost his way and went Washington. He criticized Taylor for voting to certify the 2020 election results and vowed support for a full forensic audit of the election in Texas, for God's sake. All the challengers focused on Taylor's 2021 vote for a proposed bipartisan independent commission to probe the events of January 6th. When supporters of former President Donald Trump stormed the Capitol, the commission never became law, but the Democratic House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, later formed the committee. As you know, Taylor voted against the committee, but his foes blurred the distinction as they attacked Taylor as insufficiently supportive of Trump. Trump never endorsed in the primary, by the way, though he'll claim he did, while Taylor boasted a list of endorsements led by U.S. Senator Ted Cruz and ran TV ads aligning himself with Trump's America First messaging. Tried everything, huh? It was all a political twist of fate for Taylor, who faced a competitive general election battle last year and stumped as Mr. Bipartisan. But redistricting turned his district into a Republican stronghold, providing more fertile ground for primary opposition. Before going to Congress, Taylor served in the Texas legislature, building a reputation as a staunch conservative. He was a member of the state house from 2010 to 2015 and the Texas State Senate until 2019. So a bit of a career flip-flopper, and now gone.
From netrootsradio.com.
Because of his affair with the ISIS bride.
You've been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
By the way, I hope I never heard of him having anything to say about Eric Swalwell needing to be expelled for his escapades. Anyway, time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and I've used up all the time I would normally use to try to tell you what he's got, but I think you know what you're in for, and that's why you're staying.